Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Industry. What industry, you say? The industry. The video series where we're going to discuss the job market, give career guidance, talk to different people about market intel, and everything else in between. My name is Zach Plotkin, joined by my co-host Sanjeev Menon from Madison-Davis, and today we are going to be interviewing Ari Redbord. Ari, welcome.
Zach, Sanjeev, thank you so much for having me. We've known each other for quite some time now in the space, or the industry, as you say, and really excited to join the show and looking forward to the conversation.
Do you want to introduce yourself to the audience?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'm Ari Redbord. I'm the global head of policy at TRM Labs. We're a blockchain intelligence company, and I'm sure we will dig into that a bit. Prior to joining TRM about 5 years ago, I spent about 11 years at the U.S. Department of Justice. I was an assistant U.S. attorney for the District of Columbia. And then I spent about 2 years after that at the U.S. Treasury Department, working in the office that oversees the national security apparatus, the Office of Terrorism and Financial Intelligence.
Let's start there. How did you make that transition? When did you make it? Why? The how? The what?
Yeah, no,
Let's start there.
absolutely. Love the question and really excited to dig in. I mean, I think what's interesting is like you mentioned that we are really in the very beginning today of a government shutdown. And having lived through quite a few of those in, I don't know, 13 or 14 years of government service, I will say that I worked through every one. And, I've been spending a lot of time with folks at DOJ and Treasury, and they are also hard at work, protecting the global financial system and doing the important work there. And they call them essential workers. But I think that there are, obviously so many people who are working today that aren't being paid, but hopefully will be eventually when this is all over. And you never want to sort of understate what's happening, but I do think that it's important for people to know that the hard work of stopping bad actors, national security, law enforcement is still being done. Successful transitions to the private sector. It's interesting. I have this conversation, for better or worse, with a lot of current public civil servants these days. And the first thing I start with is what excites you, right? Stop looking necessarily at what are the open roles in the world to start that search. And start more thinking about what excites you in the world, what gets you up in the morning, what inspires you, right? And it's not really a theoretical question. It's look around the world and who has a job, who does a thing that really excites you to want to do it. And then I think that sort of really starts to crystallize things as to hey, these are the types of roles or the types of jobs I want to do. And that's when you start looking for the companies. That's when you start looking for the roles themselves that really will sort of lead to that. And the reason I bring this up is because I think what success looks like is being excited to do your job every day and to be inspired by the work that you get to do. Why I think it worked for me is, and right, TBD, we're 5 years into this experiment, so we'll see ultimately. But the reason I think it worked for me is I was really able to stay on the mission, the same mission that I spent 15 years in the government doing, and that is stopping bad guys, particularly bad guys who are trying to access the global financial system. And the only sort of really huge change was I was getting to do this mission at a really cool startup as opposed to the U.S. Department of Justice, the U.S. Treasury Department. So I would say lead with your passion and what inspires you. I started to look around when I was at Treasury, say, hey, what's next? At the time I was working for super senior political appointees. I was always a career civil servant, but I was working for the deputy secretary of the Treasury at the time. And I knew that elections have consequences and was sort of figure out what's next. And I started I started looking around. Should I go to a bank? Should I go to a law firm? What in-house roles are available out there? And he hates this story because he's so humble. But I met Esteban Castano, who's the CEO and co-founder of TRM, during that process where I was looking around to see what roles might be interesting, fun, things I could be passionate about, mission-driven. And I quite frankly spoke to one of the most thoughtful, interesting, smart people that I'd ever spoken to in my life. And I got off that phone call and I said to my wife, Kelly, I said, I think I just spoke to one of the most thoughtful people I've ever spoken to. And she said, what are you talking about? And after I talked to her for a little bit, she said, you should go work with this person. And again, Esteban hates this because he is so humble. But we were about TRM when I ultimately interviewed and then joined was, I don't know, 7 or 8 people. We're about 450 today. and that's in 5 years. And I think it's because we've been able to really bring on people who share that mission. But it starts with the co-founders for sure, Esteban and Rahul Reina, who's our chief technical officer, really building a great tool and sort of putting the people there. So I think the missing link there was started to look around, had conversations with people, and maybe if there's really any lesson from that, and it's a hard lesson because like I rely on my gut a lot in the decisions I've always made, and this was like full on gut decision, right? We have big competitors in the space. We were very, very early. We had just done a seed round, which was led by PayPal at the time.
Yeah.
And, you didn't have a lot of the indicia that one would have. I think Esteban's like, I remember in the early days equated it to like, joining a boat that had like all these holes in it, right? And like just helping plug all those holes all the time. Now I'm probably just on like a, I don't know, bigger boat that has a lot of holes that we're plugging all the time. But that's just the nature of startups, and that's the nature of the space that we're all in. And honestly, that's what makes it so fun. And before I stop rambling here, one thing I think that's kind of a really interesting point too is that like what I have learned over the last 5 years, I think is really what I'm passionate about. And it's in part this mission of building a safer financial system. But I think it's also building a really cool company with really cool people. Chris Gencheski, who's our head of global investigations and probably the most famous crypto investigator of all time. He also hates when I say things like that. But he's like this really famous guy that was in this Netflix thing, and he was in Tracers in the Dark. He was the protagonist in Anne Greenberg's book, Tracers in the Dark. He calls it doing cool stuff with cool people. And I think that is what I realized I'm really, really passionate about. And that's been what I've been able to find at TRM.
Don't forget that you were also in the Netflix documentary.
And we're gonna
I was
get
in the
that
Netflix documentary too. I was.
We're gonna get that.
But
in
it
a
wasn't
second.
my case. I was the good-looking bald guy commentator on the thing, right? He was the actual
He was
protagonist,
the
the person
brains.
that did
He
the
was
work.
the brains. You were the looks.
No one has ever said that about Chris and I. If you don't know Chris, he looks like Chris Evans, Captain America.
So
no
he
one
has the looks too. I actually
no one
don't
has
know what
ever
he looks
said
like.
you're the looks and he's the brains. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ari. So
No,
he's the
no,
looks
just
and the
kidding.
brains, and you're
He's
just
bald.
the
He's
guy.
bald.
You're
Chris
just
is
the
bald.
guy.
Chris is bald.
No, but I have to ask. I'm curious. So I appreciate you going over your story about making the transition. Did you know that you wanted to do crypto?
I think crypto was something that had just really interested me for a long time. And it was mostly just, a really amazing colleague of mine, Zia Faruqi, who a lot of folks know, he's now a federal judge in DC. We sort of partnered when we were at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was doing money laundering and asset forfeiture, and I was in the national security section. And we partnered to do what Zia really like called the threat finance section, which is like, if you build it, they will come kind of thing. We built this. He built this section within the U.S. Attorney's Office. And we were doing Iran export control cases. We were doing sanctions, criminal prosecutions. We were doing terrorist financing. And we started looking at cases involving North Korea. And it's nothing like it is now in terms of North Korea's, $1.5 billion crypto hack narrative. But it was the early days of North Korea moving from counterfeit $100 bills and counterfeit cigarettes and tobacco to using Bitcoin to launder funds. And we were starting to see Bitcoin more and more in our cases. And I think we just tried to really understand, both of us together in some ways, trying to understand like what it is and how it works. And I think that was really what got me interested in the technology. And then I went to Treasury, and more from a policy perspective, crazy things happened when I was at Treasury. Again, nothing like the crazy that's happening now with the Genius Act and market structure and all this and all these interesting issues. But Libra, Facebook's sort of failed stablecoin project, launched when I was at Treasury. And I got on a plane with the Undersecretary for Terrorism and Financial Intelligence, Sigal Mandelker at the time. We went to Switzerland. We had meetings with FINMA about, hey, how can you do this? You need to put in these AML controls. We need to make sure it has this or that. We met with the Libra team. And I was like, even seeing that then, I think there was this real sense that this is the future of finance. Like, and how can I potentially be a part of it? So I think that like it wasn't a foregone conclusion, but when I met Esteban, combined with the mission and getting to be in this sort of crypto space, now this crypto space is wildly different 5 years later than it was when I did this 5 years ago. But I have, I tell people all the time, like, I've never worked harder and I have never had more fun. So as long as I get to sort of do those two things in this amazing dynamic space, then like I'm in it to win it.
Well, one of the questions that I found interesting in kind of what you said is you've kind of been there at the right time, right place when it started. When you kind of just got into it, when you first got to TRM Labs and you were looking to build out the team, what did talent look like? What are the
Yeah,
types of people you were looking for?
it's such an interesting question. I was really our first non-technical hire.
Yeah.
It was a team of data scientists and engineers because really that team had been heads down for the previous 2 years building really a next generation blockchain intelligence tool. There were a couple of competitors in the space and we wanted to do things very differently. So it was the tool, the real focus. So when I got there, it was like this conversation, well, like, who are the experts that we need to bring on? And for us, there were like a handful of tracers in the world who were sort of the power users of these blockchain analytics tools. So we sort of looked around. I'll tell you one of my favorite stories. And again, like, people at TRM are so humble. So this guy will also hate this. In fact, he might text me about it because he really doesn't like this stuff. But there's a guy named Nick Carlson. And to me, Nick is the foremost expert on North Korea in the world. Um, you know, and he was an FBI analyst who was working with Zia and I on a lot of cases. And he's really one of the first people that I reached out to when I got to TRM because I realized the problem that North Korea was, and I realized we needed like the deep expertise. And Nick's been, 5 years later, we get to do this thing together every day. And it's this really amazing thing. And you talk about talent, like, Nick is so known in this law enforcement, national security sort of community and known as an amazing person to work with that all of a sudden, like, a whole bunch of other people wanted to work with Nick and wanted to work with us with Nick. And so that was sort of a really neat thing. But when you talk about the skill set, a lot of it in the early days were like, all right, how do we build a team of investigators to work with law enforcement, but also to help us do investigations, to help us build the tool. And, it's in the early days, we hired an amazing woman who's one of the best tracers ever at the FBI named Jennifer Vanderveer. And Jennifer led our product team for some time, helping build the tool, right? By law enforcement, for law enforcement sort of thing. So, it's not a perfect answer, Zach, and it's changed over time. Like, a year after that, we realized, well, we need people to advise our private sector customers. Think Coinbase, Binance, Kraken, think Uniswap, think Citi, think, financial institutions out there in the world. How do you advise banks and crypto businesses of building a compliance solution? Years later, I can't believe that every big bank, every medium-sized bank, every crypto business is needing tools like this. We hired a guy named Tom Armstrong who built the crypto compliance program at Goldman Sachs for a decade. Tom is someone I work most closely with, but it's like, you think you need the very best to ever do this I think the way we've approached it is you need the very best who've ever done this in the private sector, and you really need the very best that's ever done this in the public sector.
It's crazy to think how much has changed over the course of even just 5 years, the want of talent, the need of talent, and kind of the skill sets that people even look for. I just find it fascinating over the course
It's
of time.
fascinating, and people ask me all the time, and I don't have the best answers about, like, what are the experience, what are the certifications, and the reality is that, like, at a still what I consider, like, I think of this as day one, early stage. I'm told that we're too big to call us that, but I do think that we are very early. You need people with deep experience and expertise in an area where there are not a lot of people with deep experience and expertise. And I think that is the big challenge when it comes to hiring at a very, very fast moving startup like TRM.
Yeah, you find people with passion more than anything else, it seems.
You do. And if you've married that passion to some extent, or you can be a really quick learner, but I think that the reality is that it's hard. And what we're really looking for, I think, in many, many roles today is like deep experience and expertise with whatever that role requires. What I tell people is to learn as much as they possibly can to really, really go deep. I mean, I'll tell you, like, when I got to TRM, I basically said to myself, like, hey, I had never been in this space before. I was not a crypto expert. Yep. And I said to myself, I need to know everyone and everything about this space, and literally made it my job to reach out to a handful of people who I thought were like really, really deep, really, really understanding this stuff. People like Michael Mosier, who was the former acting director of FinCEN. People like Rebecca Reddick, who is a lawyer in the DeFi space and really a stalwart there. Jake Chervinsky is another one of these people. I knew Christian Chesky very well at the time. We'd worked together. I reached out to Albert Faulkner, who was the state banking supervisor for Wyoming, where I thought interesting things were happening. I jumped on a plane and went to Wyoming to meet him for lunch. Like, I was just trying to figure out who I need to talk to understand how different, folks were using these things. I reached out to the compliance team at Binance, who we were working with at the time. So it's like, I know not everyone can do that, and not especially folks who are looking for the job, right? I had the job, so I could do that stuff. But I do think that that's like, it's going deep. And then the other piece of this, I did a TRM Talks the other day with Leslie Chafkin, who was a former Treasury colleague of mine who now leads policy at Paxos. And this was her point. And it's like, you need to experiment with the technology. So that's the other thing I was doing, right? I was spinning up MetaMask wallets. I minted my own NFTs. My kids and I were lining up for NBA Top Shot every drop. I did I was mess around with DeFi a bit. It's interesting. I'm doing a lot of the same stuff right now with AI. At that time it was crypto messing with the tech, but like you'll see me, I put like these like AI Ari videos on LinkedIn. That's literally just me actually messing around, trying to understand it. And then I'm like, oh, this is funny. Maybe someone else will get some benefit from it. But I think that's it. You really have to touch this stuff. You have to be hands-on. So to answer your question, like, I don't think it's all about certifications. I think it's really about going deep. It's about reading a lot. It's about experimenting with the technology.
Yeah, I think what you're trying to say is, I want to get into the space. How about you dig a little deeper to actually figure out if this is something that you really want to dive into? Vacations will come afterwards.
I think that's right. I think that it's really learning as much as you can. I think one thing that might be interesting to this conversation as you guys are thinking about this is like, so the interview process at TRM is very, very rigorous. You are having one-on-one meetings with people who are evaluating different, criteria, different personality traits, that sort of thing. It's very specific, very regimented. It is very consistent across different candidates. And then there's an on-site, usually virtual, where you sit down with a core team at TRM and you have to present on a given topic. And the reason we do that is we want to test what you know and what you can do as opposed to what you have done, right? Like, you can look at a resume and you can say, hey, this person's had this job, this person's had that job, this person went to Harvard, the Duke of the North, and they have this level of education.
Of the East.
Yeah, and they have this, and they have this level of education. But what we really want to test for is like what you would do in your role and how you would do it and how you would excel. So I say all of that to say that, like, when you're preparing to want to get into the space, to trying to get a job like this, it's like, show us what you can do. We all know, like, hey, you guys spun up a podcast to be out there, right? You can write things and publish them yourself now in ways that you never could before. So I often tell folks who are like wanting to get in, it's like, hey, if someone sends me like, hey, can you read this white paper that I wrote? I'm like almost always yes on that. Hey, take a look. And that's a really cool conversation starter. I wrote a white paper on DeFi compliance, right? Like, I'd love to read that. So I think it's all about show, don't tell when it comes to sort of an interview process, certainly at TRM, but I think at a lot of tech startups these days.
I would even take it one step before that, and it's something that we talk about quite a bit when we do these videos and just in general, is that something that you did in your career is don't be afraid to ask. Don't be afraid to network. You have to be able to put yourself out there and ask a question. And I preach that endlessly because nothing's going to help you in life, in your career, or in your job more than networking, in my opinion.
Yeah, look, I think it's this combination of networking and like adding value. Like, where can I add value to what other people are doing, what other people are building, and kind of leading with that. I mean, Sanjeev, I'm going to sell you out here, but like, we were running together in Vegas and we had this conversation a little bit, and that is like, the TRM Run Club literally is just this, right? Like, the whole idea of it is the running is secondary to this opportunity for folks to get out there, get together. You're sucking a little wind.
What Ari is saying is that he had to tail back and come back to.
You're the one saying that.
I was the last one out of the 10. He had
You're
to
the one saying that.
Jogging.
You're the one saying that. But I'm saying is like, I literally, we built that thing.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
sucking a little wind. It's all right. We built that thing to do just what you're describing, Zach, to bring people in the industry together, to have conversations. And I love it. Like, I think plenty of folks come to the TRM Run Club to network for jobs. I love that. Do that, right? Like, do stuff like that. Happy hours are great. You know, I love to have a beer or two. But there are so many different ways that you can connect with people in our industry.
So we only have a minute left, and Ari, this is actually what I'm about to say. Actually, is a good way to end based on everything you said so far. We all have a mutual friend named Steven Sargent, right? Someone said something about him, described him with a great metaphor, which I think works just as good to describe what makes you special. And that is rising tides lift all ships. You've complimented 6,000 people on this segment. I was sucking wind, and you made it seem like it wasn't a bad thing. It actually made me feel. I didn't feel bad. That was like, you make people feel special, and that is a superb trait, right? Going to Maya Angelou, right? No one cares what you did, what you do. People care about how you make them feel. And you have this special trait of making people feel special. And then you apologize for it at the same time, right? We're just like, I got to add icing on the cake.
I don't even know how to respond to that. Other than I really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a rhetorical statement. It's a compliment.
No, thank you. I will say the one thing I will respond to is I'm always happy to be looped into the same conversation with Steven, who is truly one of those people that when I was never on social media before. I was a prosecutor, right? Like that we weren't supposed to do that kind of stuff, or at least that was the perception. So when I got to TRM, I started a podcast. I realized like, I want people to listen to it. So I spun up a LinkedIn account and all of a sudden started to look around like who is talking about the things that I'm interested in and need to learn about, right? Like I'm not a compliance guy. I was a prosecutor. And Steven was very much that person. We had in the very early days of this 5+ years ago now, we used to jump on the phone periodically. Now I will say that like we're mostly just DMing each other and like sharing content before we put it out sometimes. But like he's one of those people. I feel blessed to be in a space with someone like that. But thank you. That is very, very kind and one of my favorite people out there.
Yeah, I think we all agree he's special. But you also have that talent too, and it comes naturally. The reason why I say it is to compliment you and to say, hey, that's how I feel about it. You just have this natural talent. But to make it practical, it's also something that maybe I work on, right? Rising tides lift all ships. Zach, I've known for 15 years. I make it a point, even though I've known him for 15 years, he's my second husband, my second wife, whatever. I want to make him feel special. I still want to make him feel special, right? I want to make other people feel special. That is a practical trait that could help you in your career. Instead of you being the person that's special, what can make you special is by making everyone else around you feel the same exact way.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
This is a career guidance webinar. I'm just saying.
No, absolutely, and I love that. Hopefully, there was some career guidance in here. Although, I'll tell you, thank you. And I famously run a lot with my wife, and we run these marathons, and I do sort of see this all as a journey, as a marathon. And for me, it really is the people that I get to run with along that race. And that's the coolest thing for me about being in this space. Like I try to describe, like I joined TRM for the mission, no question, the mission and the product. But I think I'm in it for the people at TRM, and then people like you guys in this space, people like Steven and others. So thank you. That means the world to me. That's like, that is that means a lot. But thank you guys so much for having me on too.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us. Please make sure to run with Arie at the TRM Run Club wherever he is in the world, and listen to him on TRM Talks.
I'm so sore.
Follow him on LinkedIn and all social media, all that stuff. But thank you very much, Arie, for the time today, and we really appreciate it here.
Love it, guys. Thanks so much for having me.